Picture this. It's the 4th of July. Kids are laughing at a summer camp by the river. Families are unpacking picnic baskets, setting up grills, and laying out slices of watermelon under a sky so wide it feels endless. And somewhere, just beyond the bend, the river is rising so fast no one has time to understand what's coming. Now imagine you're one of those families, phone in hand, dialing every emergency number you can find, and nobody answers. What would you do if the people you trusted to protect you, the ones you voted for, weren't there when you needed them most? Think about that, because in Kerr County, Texas, that question isn't hypothetical. It's history. While most of America celebrated, Kerr County was being swallowed whole. The National Weather Service sent out a flash flood emergency. On a phone screen, it looked like just another alert. But on the ground, the Guadalupe River was already running like a runaway freight train. In under an hour, it surged higher than anyone alive had ever seen. It became the deadliest flood in Texas in nearly 50 years. 135 lives were lost. 27 of them were children and counselors at Camp Everpine, a place meant for bonfires and swimming, not last breaths. But here's the part that will never sit right with this community. The elected officials who should have been leading the response weren't anywhere near the disaster. They were out of state. Cameras later caught them in Washington, smiling for the press while their districts drowned. Orders to evacuate didn't come for hours. And by the time they did, whole neighborhoods were already underwater. Dale, a volunteer firefighter, told me he slogged chest deep through debris to reach a trapped family. His radio buzzed with updates, but never the one he needed, the green light to start moving people out. It wasn't the river that beat us, he said. It was the silence from Austin. At Camp Everpine, counselors saw the water spill over the bank faster than they'd been told was possible. The soccer field turned into a brown lake. A counselor named Maya herded the kids toward the dining hall, shouting over the roar of the current. She blocked a shattered window with her shoulder while trying to keep the children calm. The laminated emergency cards told them what to do in a flood. What they didn't explain was what to do when help wasn't coming. Still, help did come, but not from the people with titles. It came from someone who'd been in war zones, who knew what it meant to act without waiting for permission. She cut through the red tape, brought in helicopters, and directed rescues herself. 237 people were saved. But the hours lost before the first chopper lifted off, those hours cost lives. One of the survivors was a boy named Brock, 7 years old. He spent nearly an hour clinging to a tree branch in the middle of the flood before the helicopter came. When rescuers pulled him up, he was silent. He stayed that way for days. Then, one afternoon in a shelter, he picked up a pencil and wrote a short, shaky letter thanking the strangers who made sure the helicopters came. It's the kind of letter that's hard to read without pausing to breathe. The rest of the county wasn't so lucky. By the next morning, the river had left its mark, a brown line across every wall, barns splintered, cattle drowned, fields stripped bare. Families returned to homes that looked like someone had turned them inside out. In the high school gym, now a shelter, people traded stories. A man who had to swim his dog to safety. A woman who tied an extension cord to her porch so her neighbor could grab it before the current took her. A teacher who kept 3 children above water by holding them on his shoulders until rescuers arrived. There was no official announcement when the rescue phase ended and recovery began. Just a slow change in the lists on the whiteboard. Street addresses turned into names, the names turned into photographs taped to a bulletin board. And yet, in the middle of all that loss, the community kept moving. Carla, who runs the diner in town, fired up her propane stove and started serving coffee and eggs for free. Pastor James opened his church as a dry place to sleep, stacking donated blankets in the pews. Volunteers hauled out ruined furniture, shoveled mud, and hugged strangers like family. The helicopters kept flying for as long as there was anyone left to save. On the last day of air rescues, Brock stood in the gym watching the choppers come and go. He didn't smile, but he didn't look away either. The water took lives, homes, and livelihoods, but it also left something behind, a town that knows exactly who it can count on when the river rises. And maybe that's the part that should stay with you. Disasters will come. Floods, fires, storms. Nature doesn't wait for permission. The real question is whether the people you've chosen to lead you will show up when it matters, or whether you'll be left to save each other. So I'll ask you again. What would you do if the people you trusted weren't there when you needed them most? Would you forgive them? Would you demand better? Or would you make sure that the next time the water starts to rise, you already know exactly where the high ground is and how to get there? Because in Kerr County, they've already learned that lesson the hard way, and they'll never forget it. A week after the water went down, Kerr County still smelled like mud and gasoline. The streets were lined with piles of ruined furniture, broken fences, and the warped frames of what used to be lives. But the cleanup wasn't the only work happening. In Washington, D.C., far from the brown water and broken roads, a hearing room filled with the low murmur of reporters and the rustle of papers. It wasn't about the weather anymore. It was about the people who weren't there when Kerr County needed them, and what they were doing instead. The room was packed. Survivors sat shoulder to shoulder with first responders. Volunteers in work boots tracked mud onto the marble floor. In the second row, a small figure sat between his mother and a woman in a dark blazer. It was Brock, holding his letter in his pocket like it was a shield. The chair gavelled the hearing to order. One by one, witnesses took the microphone. The county sheriff told how he'd radioed Austin for clearance to evacuate and got nothing but hold music. 40 minutes, he said, staring at the panel. 40 minutes waiting while the water rose. That's the difference between rescue and recovery. A nurse described swimming through filthy water to reach patients trapped in a clinic. The buses never came, she said. We were told to wait for authorization that never arrived. Then the pilot spoke. He'd flown helicopters in disasters before. We were told to stand down, he said, but I could see kids on the roof of a camp building. I ignored the order. If I'd waited, we'd be counting bodies instead of survivors. On the big screen, a timeline appeared. The flood warning was issued. Minutes later, key state leaders, including those responsible for Kerr County, boarded flights out of Texas. The timestamp was clear. 4 minutes after the warning, the chair leaned into the microphone. They knew. It wasn't just absence. The investigation revealed contracts for flood response awarded to companies that never showed up. Millions wired to accounts offshore while families slept on cots in high school gyms. Emails showing the trip out of state was planned in advance. When Brock's turn came, the room went still. He stood on tiptoe to reach the microphone. His voice was soft but steady. Please don't let them forget what happened to us. The silence afterward was heavier than any gavel. One witness after another connected the same dots. Delays caused by missing decision makers, money routed to political donors, projects paid for but never started. A survivor from Kerr County told the panel how her neighbors had pooled cash to rent a bulldozer and clear a road themselves. Later, she found out the contractor who should have done it had been paid in full 2 weeks earlier. An FBI agent confirmed what everyone suspected. Some of the flood money had been laundered through shell companies. Properties bought in Nevada, transfers to the Cayman Islands. It wasn't incompetence. It was a choice. And then came the email. Projected on the screen, it read, "Secure the DC trip. Local ops can stall if needed. Optics are survivable." The woman in the dark blazer, the one who had flown the helicopters into the flood zone, leaned into the microphone. "Tell that," she said, to the 135 people who didn't survive. The hearing stretched into the evening. Subpoenas were issued for bank records, travel logs, and communications from the week of the flood. A whistleblower affidavit confirmed that key officials knew the flood alert was active when they left. By the end of the day, the chair read a draft resolution recommending the case be referred to the Department of Justice for criminal investigation. The gavel fell hard. This is no longer just a hearing. It's the beginning of prosecution. Outside the room, the cameras caught Brock leaving with his mom. Reporters shouted questions, but he kept his head down. The woman in the blazer walked with them to the elevator. She didn't say a word, and she didn't need to. Back in Texas, the fight wasn't over. The town wanted laws to make sure leaders couldn't leave during an active emergency. Volunteers still dragged debris out of fields. Farmers planted again, not because the soil was ready, but because they refused to let the season go to waste. And every time it rained hard, people's eyes flicked to the river. The sound of rushing water wasn't just water anymore. It was a memory. Weeks later, the statement came. One of the central figures in the investigation would step back from official duties. To some, it felt like progress. To others, it was just politics. At a community meeting in Kerr County, people crowded into the school gym, the same place it had served as a shelter. The woman with the helicopters stood at the front, boots still marked with river mud. The flood took lives, she told them. We can't change that, but we can make sure no one in power gets to walk away from their duty without consequences. The crowd rose to their feet. Brock stood too, clutching his letter in one hand and his mother's in the other. Maybe the hearings would lead to charges. Maybe they wouldn't. But here, in the place where the river stood up and tried to take everything, people had already made a promise to each other. Never again. Never again would they wait for permission to save a neighbor. Never again would they assume someone else had the responsibility. Never again would they let a chain of command be an excuse for silence. Because the river will rise again someday. And when it does, Kerr County will be ready, with or without the people in the suits.